The hushed reverence in our living room always felt suffocating, especially around Memorial Day. It was a palpable atmosphere, a thick blanket woven from unspoken grief and carefully curated memories. Flowers, always fresh, always meticulously arranged, adorned the mantelpiece. Framed photos, glossy and forever young, captured Sarah in a multitude of moments, each one a silent testament to a life cut short. And then there was the silence, a heavy pressing weight that seemed to descend upon our chests, making each breath a conscious effort. We'd gather, my mother, my father, my aunt, Uncle George, their familiar faces etched with a shared sorrow that had become as ingrained as the lines on their skin. We'd sit, often in the same chairs, and recount the same stories, the same idealized memories of Sarah, my older sister. They'd talk about her strength, a seemingly inexhaustible wellspring that guided her every action. They spoke of her unwavering patriotism, a flame that burned so brightly it consumed all else. And then, of course, there was the ultimate price she paid, a phrase delivered with a solemn nod and a catch in the throat. And I, the younger, quieter sibling, the one who had always existed in the gentle orbit of Sarah's brilliance, would nod in agreement, offer a choked-back sob that felt more performative than genuine, and let them lead. They had, over the years, built a veritable shrine to her sacrifice, a hallowed space where her memory was polished to a blinding sheen. And for years I was happy, or at least content, to stand beside it, a dutiful mourner in the grand, silent procession of our family's grief. Then came the estate sale. It wasn't a sudden decision, but rather a slow, inevitable progression. Mom and Dad were downsizing, shedding the layers of their lives in their childhood home, preparing for a smaller, perhaps less burdened future. I'd offered to help sort through Sarah's old things, a task I'd initially approached with a mixture of dread and a strange sense of obligation. These were items that had been packed away untouched for years, relics from a life abruptly halted, sealed in time and memory. It was a morbid task, undeniably so, sifting through remnants of a life frozen in amber. Most of it was what you'd expect, the mundane detritus of a young woman's existence. Worn textbooks with pages dog-eared at passages that likely held some academic significance, a few faded concert t-shirts, the band names barely legible ghosts of youthful exuberance, a collection of dog-eared paperbacks, their spines cracked and their pages softened by countless readings, each one a portal to another world Sarah had escaped into. But tucked away in the bottom of an old, battered trunk, beneath a pile of threadbare blankets that smelled faintly of mothballs and forgotten summers, I found it. A small, unassuming leather-bound ledger. It wasn't a diary, not in the conventional sense. There were no effusive confessions, no heart-wrenching entries about teenage angst or romantic entanglements. Instead, it was a meticulous record of financial transactions, a stark ledger of numbers and dates, dating back years before Sarah joined the military, and continuing through her service, even through the deployment that ultimately took her. At first, I assumed it was just her tracking personal expenses, a habit of orderliness that mirrored her general disposition. Perhaps she was saving for something, a down payment on a car, a trip she'd dreamed of. But as I flipped through the neat, cursive entries, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The elegant script, once a symbol of her grace, now felt like a coded message. There were regular withdrawals, significant amounts, consistently channeled to an account I didn't recognize. The dates were precise, the amounts often rounded to the exact dollar, a level of meticulousness that was almost unnerving. It wasn't a savings account, not for a down payment or a future investment. This was something else entirely. Something hidden. Something that whispered of secrets. The ledger sat on my desk for days, a dark secret against the backdrop of our family's manufactured sainthood. I'd find myself picking it up, running my fingers over the worn leather cover, rereading the entries, each one a tiny puzzle piece. I kept replaying the hushed conversations, the way Sarah's memory was polished to a blinding sheen, the narrative of selfless devotion that had become our family's central pillar, the bedrock upon which we all stood. My parents spoke of her sacrifices as if they were singular, monumental events, defined by her enlistment and her eventual tragic end. They never spoke of her life before, of her choices, of her responsibilities outside of the idealized portrait they painted. They painted a picture of a girl who gave everything entirely with no lingering threads, no private desires, no earthly entanglements beyond her perceived duty. It was a life distilled to T's essence of sacrifice, a flawless, untarnished offering. The truth, as it began to unfurl from those meticulously recorded numbers, was far more complicated. Sarah had a life, a secret life that existed parallel to the one we mourned, A life lived beneath the surface of our shared reality. And the sheer scale of it, the amount of money she had been discreetly diverting, was staggering. $72,000. It wasn't just pocket change, not a few $100s saved here and there. It was a substantial sum, enough to change a life, enough to alleviate a significant burden. But to whom was she sending it? And why the absolute secrecy, the meticulous veiling of this financial artery? I started cross-referencing dates with the few vague recollections I had of Sarah's conversations with our parents, with the general timeline of her military service. There were specific periods where the withdrawals intensified, where the amounts grew larger, more frequent. These periods coincided with times my parents often spoke of her struggling, of her needing to economize, of her making sacrifices for her cause. Sacrifices that, according to their carefully curated narrative, were solely for her country, for her fellow soldiers, for the greater good. But this ledger told a different story. It suggested a financial obligation, a sustained, hidden outflow that predated her service and continued throughout it, a quiet, constant drain on her resources that we, her family, were utterly oblivious to. It hinted at a commitment that ran deeper, and perhaps was more complex, than any of us had ever understood. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a sudden sharp intake of breath that left me breathless. The shrine we had erected, the unwavering admiration we held, the collective grief that had become our family's very identity, it was all built on an incomplete, possibly even misleading foundation. My sister, the icon, the martyr, the unwavering symbol of selfless devotion, had a profound secret, a financial anchor dragging her down in ways we never knew, never suspected. And the family's unwavering narrative of her pure singular sacrifice was perhaps a convenient, even necessary simplification. It was a narrative that allowed them to process their loss, to find meaning in her absence, to elevate her to a pedestal of untouchable perfection. I didn't confront anyone. The thought of shattering my parents' carefully constructed reality, of injecting this harsh, complex truth into the delicate fabric of their grief, felt like a violation. They needed their Sarah, their perfect, selfless Sarah, the one who existed in the glow of their memories. And I, the silent observer, the one who had always lived in her shadow, the one who never quite measured up to the impossible standard she represented, found myself holding a different kind of power. Not a power to hurt, not a power to expose and destroy, but a quiet, potent power to know. The power of possession of the truth, however uncomfortable. The next family gathering was for a birthday, not a memorial. The usual solemnity, the heavy weight of remembrance wasn't as pronounced, but the underlying current of Sarah's memory was always there. A ghost at the feast, a familiar scent in the air. My mother was recounting a story about Sarah's early childhood, how she'd always shared her toys, even her favorite doll, with anyone who asked. My father nodded, his eyes distant, a familiar ache in his expression, a silent acknowledgement of the past. Uncle George chimed in with a memory of her ambition, her drive, how she'd always set her sights high, even as a child. The usual tableau of loving reminiscence unfolded, each anecdote a carefully placed brick in the edifice of Sarah's idealized past. And then my mother, her gaze drifting, turned to me, her smile faltering slightly, a subtle shift in the carefully maintained facade. "You've been so quiet lately, dear. Everything all right?" Her concern, while genuine, felt tinged with a familiar apprehension, as if my quietness might signify a deviation from the expected emotional trajectory. I took a slow sip of water, the cool liquid a small comfort against the rising tide of apprehension and resolve. The ledger was in my car, a few blocks away, a heavy weight in the trunk. It felt even heavier in my mind, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I looked at them, at their earnest, grieving faces, their unwavering belief in the Sarah they had constructed, the Sarah they needed to believe in. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the turmoil within, "I was doing some sorting through Sarah's old things. You know, the stuff from her trunk. I found some of her financial records from before she enlisted." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, watching their reactions, small tremors in the calm surface. A flicker of mild curiosity crossed my mother's face, quickly replaced by a gentle dismissal, a familiar tendency to smooth over anything that might disturb the prevailing atmosphere. "Oh, how interesting. She always was so organized, wasn't she? So meticulous about her accounts." "Yes," I continued, my gaze meeting hers directly, holding it. The soft hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify in the sudden stillness. "Remarkably so. I was just surprised to see how much she was sending out regularly, to a private account I didn't recognize. Over $70,000 in total before she left. I kept my tone neutral, matter of fact, as if I were simply sharing an innocuous observation. The silence that fell was different from the usual mournful hush that accompanied Sarah's name. This was a stunned, disbelieving quiet, a vacuum created by the sudden absence of expected responses. My father's hand, which had been resting on his knee, froze mid-gesture. Uncle George blinked, a slow, bewildered movement, his usual jovial expression replaced by one of utter confusion. My mother's smile had completely vanished, her lips parted slightly as if she were about to speak, but no sound emerged. 70,000? My mother whispered, her voice thin, reedy like a distant echo. What are you talking about? Her eyes, usually so warm and reassuring, now held a flicker of alarm, a dawning confusion that threatened to unravel her composure. Just a lot of money, I said, my gaze unwavering. Regular payments. Seemed like a significant ongoing commitment. I just thought it was odd, given how she always told us she was saving up for her education, for her future, that she was being so frugal because she had these long-term goals. I chose my words carefully, weaving a subtle thread of doubt into the fabric of their certainty. My father finally spoke, his voice raspy, thick with a disquiet he couldn't quite articulate. She never mentioned anything like that to us. The words were not accusatory, but rather filled with a profound sense of bewilderment, a chasm between his memory and the information I was presenting. She didn't mention it to me either for a long time, I admitted, a small embellishment that felt necessary to bridge the gap between my knowledge and their ignorance. Not until later. Not until after the finances became difficult for her. The difficulties were a lie, or rather, a carefully constructed half-truth. The ledger showed consistency, not hardship. The difficulties were a potential justification, a way to frame this unexplained outflow within a narrative they could grasp, a narrative that still maintained a semblance of her character as someone facing challenges. My aunt, who had been quietly knitting, her needles clicking a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the conversation, dropped them. The soft clatter echoed in the suddenly too loud room, a sharp punctuation mark in the tense silence. My mother looked pale, her eyes darting between me and my father, a silent plea for an explanation that neither of us could yet provide. Who was she sending it to? My father asked, his voice gaining a desperate edge, a frantic need to understand, to pin down this anomaly. Was it debt? Some kind of trouble? The word debt hung in the air, a heavy, unwelcome presence. I don't know, I said truthfully, the honest answer feeling both liberating and unsettling. The account name wasn't specific, just a series of transfers, but it was a consistent, substantial outflow. For years. I emphasized the duration, the unwavering commitment, the sheer persistence of it. The conversation devolved from there, not into an immediate outburst, but into a hushed, anxious discussion between my parents. They began sifting through old bank statements that were likely still in boxes in the basement, their voices low, urgent, trying to reconcile this new, unsettling information with their carefully preserved memories of Sarah. They were searching for clues, for explanations, for a way to bridge the disconnect. Uncle George remained silent, his brow furrowed in thought, the jovial mask he usually wore replaced by a look of deep contemplation. My aunt stared at her lap, her knitting forgotten, the dropped needles a symbol of the disrupted rhythm of their lives. The reverence that usually permeated these gatherings, the almost sacred aura surrounding Sarah's memory, was replaced by a brittle anxiety, a sense of something irrevocably altered, a crack in the flawless facade. I didn't press. I didn't offer to show them the ledger, the physical evidence that would undeniably confirm my words. I didn't need to. The seed of doubt, the undeniable evidence of a hidden life, a parallel existence that ran beneath the surface of their understanding, had been planted. Their saint, their perfect, unblemished Sarah, had feet of clay, and that was a truth they would now have to grapple with alone, in the quiet aftermath of my revelation. They would have to reconcile the Sarah who I mourned, the idealized martyr, with the Sarah who harbored such a significant, secret financial life, a life that suggested a complexity and a burden we had never witnessed. Their shrine, once so solid and immutable, now felt shaky, its foundations exposed to the harsh light of reality. And in the ensuing confusion, in the uncomfortable silences that stretched between them, punctuated by hesitant questions and uncertain whispers, I felt a quiet, profound sense of equilibrium settle over me. The honored sacrifice was still honored, its nobility acknowledged, but now it was tinged with a complicated truth, a truth that belonged not to the hallowed past, but to the living, to the ones left behind to make sense of it all, to navigate the murky waters of memory and reality. The weight on my chest hadn't entirely lifted, but it had shifted, transforming from the burden of unspoken grief into the quiet power of understanding.